I remember the first time Sarah talked to me about getting involved in charity work. She'd always been passionate about giving back and making a difference. Back when we were young and planning our future together, it was one of those dreams she often mentioned, like how some people talk about learning to play the piano or traveling the world. But life has a way of sidetracking us. Between work, bills, family, and the general grind of daily life, her charity ambitions became something she put aside. I thought maybe it was a phase, a passion she'd revisit in retirement. Then, a few months ago, she came home from a local event with a spark in her eyes that I hadn't seen in years. I remember looking up from the book I was reading as she walked in, practically glowing. She dropped her bag by the door and launched into a story about her day, her words tumbling out in an excited rush. "I met someone amazing today, Eric," she said, her face animated. "Her name's Lily, and she's incredible. You know, one of those people who just lights up a room. She runs a community organization and seems to know everyone in the charity world around here. I feel like I've finally found my place." It was impossible not to feel excited for her. Sarah had always been steady, grounded, and so supportive of me and my dreams over the years. To see her finding something that ignited her passion again was, honestly, a relief. I wanted her to feel fulfilled and energized, to have something just for herself. I'd encourage her to go to these charity events in the first place. Seeing her happiness reassured me that maybe it was the right thing, even if it took her out of the house more often. In the beginning, I joined her for a few of the events, mingling with Lily and meeting the other volunteers. Lily was exactly as Sarah described, lively and magnetic, the type who could pull people together with her laughter and warmth. She was tall and graceful, with an unshakable confidence that made her seem like she belonged wherever she went. It was clear she was a respected figure in the community. She seemed to command the room effortlessly, her charisma contagious, and I found myself feeling grateful for her. In some strange way, it felt like Lily had given Sarah a new lease on life. As Sarah grew more invested in the charity work, I noticed subtle changes in her. She started dressing differently, more vibrant, artsy outfits, a few new jewelry pieces I hadn't seen before. She'd linger in front of the mirror a bit longer, applying a new shade of lipstick or adjusting her hair. She looked happy, but there was also a hint of mystery. I told myself it was just a natural reaction to finding a new purpose, but deep down, I couldn't help but feel a little left out. Our conversations drifted more and more to her new life, the people she was meeting, the events she was organizing, and how much joy it brought her. And Lily? Lily was the center of it all. It was always Lily did this, Lily said that, Lily introduced me to this person. Lily had become this almost mythical figure in our lives, someone I heard about every day, but saw less and less. Sarah spoke about her with a kind of reverence, like a mentor, a sister, and a best friend all in one. I told myself I was just being paranoid, that maybe I felt left out because Sarah was finding something I couldn't entirely share with her. I wanted to be the supportive husband, to let her grow and explore without being a barrier. But there was something about the way she spoke about Lily that left me feeling unsettled. Then came the night she introduced me to Alex. Sarah had talked about him a few times before we met. Alex was Lily's younger brother, she'd told me, and like his sister, he had a deep-rooted passion for helping others. She described him as someone who lived and breathed for the causes he believed in, a kind, selfless soul who made everyone feel seen and heard. From the way she spoke about him, I imagined someone rough around the edges, maybe a little quirky, someone who poured all of his energy into his work. But when I finally met him at one of their charity events, he was nothing like I expected. Alex was the kind of man who radiated charm and confidence. He was tall, with a warm smile, and an easy way of making everyone feel comfortable. He had this effortless grace, the type that made you believe he belonged in every room he entered. I remember the handshake he gave me, firm, genuine, like he wanted to make a good impression. And I couldn't deny that he seemed like a decent guy. As the night went on, I noticed how naturally he and Sarah slipped into conversation. They shared stories, laughter, and an unspoken understanding that felt oddly intimate, even though I knew they hadn't known each other that long. Every now and then, Sarah would glance over at me, offering a smile, but her attention would drift back to Alex, as if they were two magnets drawn to each other. The more time passed, the more I felt myself being pushed to the sidelines. I watched from across the room as they laughed and leaned in close, caught up in their own little world while Lily and I talked with other guests. There was a look in Sarah's eyes that night, a brightness, a spark that I hadn't seen in a long time. It was the same look she used to have when she looked at me. After that night, Alex seemed to be a permanent fixture in Sarah's life. She started mentioning him casually at home, telling me about his latest project, his ideas for the charity, and the suggestions he'd made to improve their outreach. Alex has such great insights, she'd say over dinner, her eyes lighting up. He's been doing this for years, you know? He really understands how to connect with people. I try to play it cool, to act like it didn't bother me. But there was something about the way she talked about him that left a sour taste in my mouth. She'd never spoken about anyone else like that, not even Lily. And while I wanted to be happy for her, to support her, there was a growing sense of unease gnawing at me. The late nights started becoming a regular thing. Sarah would tell me she was heading over to Lily's to work on a big project, but when I'd offer to come along or help out, she'd smile and shake her head. "Oh, Eric, you'd be bored out of your mind. It's just work stuff, lots of planning and organizing. You know how it is." I wanted to trust her, to believe that she was simply caught up in something that inspired her. But as the weeks went by, I began noticing little things that didn't sit right. She'd laugh more freely when she talked about Alex, her voice softening in a way that made me feel like I was intruding on something private. And every time she mentioned his name, there was this light in her eyes, this barely concealed excitement. Then one night, after she'd come home from another planning session, I asked her about it. She'd looked tired but exhilarated, her cheeks flushed, her hair a little tousled. "You're spending a lot of time with Lily and Alex lately," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. "Is everything all right?" She paused, giving me a look that was hard to read. "Of course, Eric. We're just working hard to make a difference. You know how much this means to me." "I do," I replied, watching her closely. "I'm proud of you, Sarah. I miss you, that's all." She softened, reaching out to touch my hand. "I miss you too. I promise, it's just for a while. Once this event is over, things will settle down." But as comforting as her words sounded, there was something guarded in her tone, a hint of distance that I couldn't ignore. Over the next few weeks, my suspicions grew. I'd catch her texting late at night, her phone angled away so I couldn't see the screen. She'd chuckle softly, a faint smile on her lips, and when I'd ask who she was talking to, she'd brush it off, saying it was just work stuff. But one night, when she got up to grab a glass of water, I glanced at her phone and saw a message from Alex. It was something simple, a line that wouldn't have meant much to anyone else, but it made my heart sink. "Can't wait for tomorrow. It'll be our little secret." I went to bed that night with a knot in my stomach, feeling like I'd stumbled upon something that was better left hidden. I knew it was crazy to follow her. I felt like some suspicious, paranoid character from a novel. But when Sarah left that evening, I couldn't sit still. I waited until she'd been gone for about 15 minutes, then grabbed my keys and headed out. My mind was racing the whole drive, battling between wanting to find nothing and dreading the possibility that I'd find everything. Sarah had mentioned a charity event that night at one of her favorite venues, a charming old cathedral that the organization rented for some of their gatherings. I parked a little ways down the street and watched as people trickled in, all dressed in the understated elegance that Sarah had started adopting. I felt out of place in my car, like a stranger watching his own life from the outside. Then I saw her. Sarah was standing under the soft glow of the lanterns outside the cathedral, laughing with Alex. Even from a distance, I could see the energy between them, a warmth that made them look like a perfect match. I felt a dull ache in my chest, watching the easy way she laughed, the way she leaned into him as if the rest of the world faded away when they were together. That was our laugh, our kind of closeness. Or at least it had been. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it was just a friendship, an innocent connection. But that quiet, nagging doubt had grown into something I couldn't ignore. I stayed out of sight, moving quietly as I followed them, feeling the raw nerves of someone on the edge of a terrible discovery. They entered the cathedral, slipping through the archway and into the grand hall. At first, I thought they might have genuinely been setting up for an event. But as I watched them, it was clear they weren't there for charity planning. They were there for each other. Alex touched her arm as they talked, a gesture so small yet so intimate, and she responded by placing a hand on his shoulder, her fingers lingering in a way that felt like an unspoken promise. And then, they drifted toward a side door that led to one of the cathedral's secluded rooms. It was a quiet, hidden space, dimly lit by the soft, warm glow of antique chandeliers. I followed them down the hallway, staying just far enough behind so they wouldn't notice me. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering, as I heard them murmur and laugh softly behind the closed door. I strained to hear, picking up fragments of their conversation, small, affectionate phrases that made my stomach twist. And then, I heard her laugh again, that soft, breathy sound that had once been mine. Unable to bear it any longer, I moved close enough to peer through the narrow crack in the door. Inside, they were standing close, faces mere inches apart. Alex brushed a stray hair from her face, his hand lingering on her cheek, and she leaned into his touch, closing her eyes as if savoring the moment. It was a scene from a movie, two people sharing a stolen moment, wrapped up in a world that didn't include me. They didn't kiss, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. They didn't need words to communicate what was brewing there. I felt frozen, caught between wanting to barge in and demand answers and being too shattered to move. I watched as she held his hand, her thumb tracing small circles on his palm, a gesture that spoke of familiarity and tenderness. The weight of betrayal pressed down on me, and I finally understood the depth of her connection to Alex. It wasn't just a flirtation or a passing attraction. It was something deep and real, something I had no part in. When they finally left the room, I hid in the shadows, barely able to breathe. They walked out together, his arm around her shoulders, and she rested her head against him in a gesture that felt far too comfortable, too right. I watched them disappear through the doors of the cathedral, laughing together as they left, their voices echoing softly in the night. I stayed in that darkened hallway, my mind reeling. It felt as though the world had shifted, like everything I thought I knew had been torn apart. I was left alone with the raw realization that the woman I loved, the woman I'd shared a life with, had built something new and secret, a life that didn't include me. By the time I got home, I was numb. I didn't know what I was going to say, or how I was even going to begin. All I knew was that I needed answers. I couldn't pretend to ignore the betrayal that had unfolded right in front of me. I waited, sitting in the quiet of our home, until the door creaked open and Sarah walked in. Her face softened when she saw me, and for a split second, I almost convinced myself that maybe I'd been wrong, that I was just imagining things. But the look in her eyes, that subtle, lingering glow, was unmistakable. She tried to brush past me, to head upstairs, but I couldn't let her walk away. "Sarah," I said, my voice low and steady, though I felt anything but steady inside. She turned, giving me a look that was part confusion, part apprehension. "Eric, is something wrong? Where were you tonight?" I asked, though the question felt like a formality. I already knew the answer. She hesitated, glancing down, her fingers fiddling nervously. "I told you, Eric. I was at the charity event with Lily and Alex. We were just discussing some logistics for the next event." I shook my head, unable to believe how easily she lied, how effortlessly the words rolled off her tongue. "I was there, Sarah. I saw you." Her face paled, and for a moment, I saw the mask slip. She looked away, swallowing hard. "Eric, it's not what you think. Alex and we're just close friends." "Close friends?" I repeated, the bitterness clear in my voice. "You think I don't know what I saw? I saw the way you looked at him, the way you held his hand, the way you touched him." She took a deep breath, composing herself before meeting my gaze. "Eric, you have to understand, it's complicated." It was late when she got home that night, her face flushed from the cool air and, no doubt, the thrill of whatever moment she'd just shared with him. She greeted me with a smile, the kind of tired but content smile I'd seen her wear countless times. Only now I knew it had been for someone else. I didn't give her the chance to play innocent. "Sarah," I said, standing in the living room, hands clenched. We need to talk. Her face flickered with confusion, maybe even a hint of fear, but she nodded, setting her bag aside. What's going on, Eric? I cut straight to the heart of it. What's going on is you and Alex. I know. I know about the museum, the late-night meetings, all of it. So don't insult me with lies. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes wide and jaw slightly open, as if she'd forgotten how to speak. She started to deny it, but I cut her off again, holding up the printed emails and the text she thought she'd hidden. Her shoulders slumped, and the fight drained from her. She looked down at the floor, a faint tremor in her voice as she finally whispered, I'm sorry, Eric. Sorry. I repeated, my voice harsher than I intended. That's it. She took a deep breath, as if gathering courage, then looked at me with a mix of defiance and shame. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I didn't plan it, but being around Alex, it just felt like I was waking up from something. I felt alive in a way I hadn't in years. Alive. I could barely get the word out. So, what have we been doing all this time? Were you just waiting for something better to come along? She shook her head, her eyes misting over. No, Eric. I love you. But it's been different. Routine. We got comfortable, we settled, and somewhere along the way, I felt like I started fading into the background. Her words stung, each one cutting a little deeper. So you let him sweep in and play hero, telling you things you wanted to hear? That I wasn't enough for you? She took a step closer, her voice softer. Alex reminded me of the woman I used to be, the woman you fell in love with. He saw parts of me that I thought were long gone, and yes, it made me feel wanted, important, alive. Important, I scoffed, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. You think I don't appreciate you? That I don't see you? I've spent years trying to make you feel loved, supporting every passion, every dream you've had, even pushing you to get involved in the charity work that led you to him. Her eyes dropped, and I could see her wrestling with her guilt, with the parts of herself she didn't want to admit. She started to cry, a quiet and vulnerable sound that might have broken me a year ago, but now only made me feel emptier. You're right, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not your fault. But Alex, he's opened up a side of me I didn't even know was still there. I felt like I could be myself around him, like I could breathe. So, what does that mean for us? I asked, my voice rough, barely containing the desperation beneath it. Are you telling me I'm just supposed to share you with him? She shook her head, glancing away. I don't want to leave you, Eric. I don't. But I don't want to lose what I have with him, either. I need both of you in my life. The words hit me like a punch. She was standing in front of me, looking me in the eyes, and telling me she wasn't willing to choose, that she wanted me to accept a version of love that had space for another man. My stomach turned, and I felt a wave of nausea rise within me. You honestly think I'm going to stand here and agree to share you? I said, my voice shaking. To pretend like this can be normal? She looked away, silent, maybe realizing for the first time how absurd her proposition was. But even now, there was something defiant in her silence, a stubborn belief that this life she'd found with Alex was her right. I thought I knew you, Sarah, I said, barely able to hold back the hurt. I thought you were the woman who stood by my side for all these years. But you're willing to throw it all away for some fantasy with a man who barely knows you. She looked up, finally meeting my gaze with tear-streaked cheeks, and whispered, I'm sorry, Eric, but I can't pretend to be someone I'm not anymore. As I turned away from her, heading upstairs to our room, I realized that the woman I'd loved all these years was already gone. I was standing next to a stranger, someone who didn't value our life, our years together. And in that moment, the only thing I knew was that I couldn't stay with a woman who thought of me as a convenience, a backup to her new, thrilling romance. This was the end of something I'd cherished, and yet the anger and betrayal bubbling inside me told me it was only the beginning of what I'd need to do to reclaim my own life. I stayed up all night, thinking through what had happened, replaying her words and trying to figure out where we had gone so wrong. There was a time, not too long ago, when I would have done anything for Sarah, thinking I'd spend the rest of my life by her side. But after her confession, all I could feel was a bitter ache. I didn't want to give up on us, not without a fight. So that morning, I went downstairs and found her in the kitchen, looking weary and a little lost, as if the confession from the night before had finally drained the thrill out of her affair. This was my moment. If there was anything left of us, it had to be now. "Sarah," I said, my voice tight, "I need you to listen carefully. I'm not going to live like this, sharing you with another man. It's me or it's him, but you can't have both. I want you to choose. Right here, right now." She looked up at me, and I saw the conflict in her eyes. It was as if I could watch her weighing the years of history we had against this sudden, intense infatuation she'd found with Alex. For a moment, I thought she'd come to her senses, that she'd realize what she was risking. But she bit her lip, and I saw her resolve falter. "Eric, you don't understand," she whispered. "I can't just turn off what I feel for him. He makes me feel like myself again, like I'm alive in a way I haven't been in so long. This isn't something I can just walk away from." Her words sliced through me. "And what about us, Sarah? Does that mean nothing to you? After everything we've built together, you're willing to throw it all away for someone you barely know?" She looked away, silent. Her hesitation, her unwillingness to give me an answer, was answer enough. "Is this really what you want?" I asked, my voice breaking despite myself. "To walk away from everything we've shared? From the life we've built?" She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, and when she opened them, I could see her decision was made. "Eric, I need to follow my heart. I'm sorry, but I can't keep pretending to be someone I'm not. I need to do this for me." I felt something shatter inside me at that moment. There she was, the woman I'd dedicated years of my life to, telling me she was walking away. And for what? For a man who knew nothing of the challenges we'd weathered together, the sacrifices we'd made. For someone who had simply been in the right place at the right time to feed her fantasies. She packed her things that evening. There was no tearful goodbye, no final embrace. She was already gone in every way that mattered. As she closed the door behind her, a sense of emptiness settled over me. I'd given her every chance to choose our life, our marriage, and she'd chosen him instead. I sat in the quiet that night, listening to the echoes of memories in a house that now felt hollow. But beneath the sadness, beneath the grief, something else stirred, a steely resolve. She thought she could walk away, leave me behind without consequence, and slip into her new life as if I'd never mattered. But she was wrong. As the hours passed, my heartbreak began to turn into something else. A burning desire to make her and Alex regret the day they decided I was a stepping stone on their path to freedom. She might have left me, but I wasn't going to let her walk away unscathed. I started making my plan, methodically, coldly, fueled by the very betrayal that had shattered me. They wanted to play with my life, my trust, my love, and I'd make sure they paid for it. The moment Sarah closed the door behind her, I began piecing together the steps of my plan. If she and Alex thought they could walk away without consequences, they had gravely underestimated me. I'd given her loyalty, respect, and years of my life, and I refused to be left in the shadows while they basked in the glow of their deceit. They needed to feel the weight of what they had done, and I would make sure they did. I spent the next few days meticulously collecting every scrap of evidence. I combed through our shared phone records, our emails, and even old receipts she'd carelessly left behind. I discovered texts full of flirtation, images of them together at events, and details of every secret meeting they'd arranged. Each piece of evidence felt like a fresh wound, but it also solidified my resolve. She'd risked everything we had on this reckless affair, and now it was time for her to face the consequences. Once I had everything I needed, I made a few calls to the charity board. Sarah had been heavily involved in the organization, and Alex's position within it was also significant. I let the board members know I had important information to share, something that would protect the integrity of their organization. The people at the charity had trusted both Sarah and Alex. They deserved to know what had been going on right under their noses. The board agreed to meet, along with a few close friends and family members. I arranged for the gathering to take place at the charity's main venue, a place where Sarah and Alex had presented themselves as pillars of the community. That irony wasn't lost on me. It was exactly where I wanted to reveal the truth. The night of the gathering, I arrived early, setting up the evidence I had compiled. I prepared a slideshow, a folder of printed messages, and a few damning photos, all neatly organized. As the guests started arriving, I could see some puzzled faces: Sarah's parents, our mutual friends, charity colleagues. Even Alex himself showed up, looking smug and utterly unaware of the storm about to hit. Then Sarah walked in, her expression shifting as she took in the room, realizing who was there. She gave me a tight, nervous smile, but I stayed silent. When everyone had settled, I finally spoke. "Thank you all for coming tonight," I began, keeping my tone steady and controlled. "There are things that need to be brought to light, things that have been hidden for too long." I looked at Sarah and Alex, both of them shifting uncomfortably. This is about truth and integrity, things that should matter in any relationship, personal or professional. I proceeded to present the evidence methodically, revealing every message, every photo, every meeting spot, as stunned silence fell over the room. Sarah's face turned pale, and Alex's smug expression melted away, replaced by a mixture of shock and panic. When I shared how their affair had breached the charity's code of conduct, implicating Alex as he had misused his role to cover for their rendezvous, the board members looked furious. A few even left the room, disgusted by what they had just learned. "You've betrayed not just me," I said, addressing Sarah directly, "but everyone here. You put your own desires above your commitments to me, to our friends, and to this organization that trusted you." Her eyes were wide, and she looked away, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't stop there. I had already met with my lawyer the previous day, filing for divorce and ensuring our assets would be divided in a way that protected me. I'd be damned if Sarah was going to walk away with anything after what she'd done. The financial blow was swift and final, leaving her with little more than what she had brought into the marriage. In the aftermath of the reveal, Alex had no choice but to resign from his position at the charity. His reputation was in ruins, and the damage to his career was likely irreversible. The charity distanced itself from both of them, stripping them of any influence or connection they'd once held. Sarah, on the other hand, found herself ostracized by the very community she'd thrown herself into. Friends turned cold, and family members withdrew, too ashamed and disappointed to stand by her side. Finally, with everything settled, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. The betrayal had scarred me deeply, but it also reminded me of the strength I possessed, the strength to stand up for myself, to rebuild from the wreckage they'd left behind. As I watched Sarah and Alex fade from my life, facing the consequences of their actions alone, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I had reclaimed my self-respect, my dignity, and my future. I'd learned the hard way that betrayal can come from those you trust the most, but it doesn't have to define you. It was time to move forward, free from the lies and deception, ready to start anew on my own terms.